On January 6, 2026, the global geopolitical landscape shifted dramatically as the White House confirmed that President Donald Trump and his senior advisors have officially revived and intensified discussions regarding the acquisition of Greenland. This development, far from being a mere repetition of the 2019 proposal, is now being framed by Washington as a top-tier national security priority. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed that the administration is exploring several specific mechanisms for the transfer of sovereignty, ranging from an outright financial purchase from the Kingdom of Denmark to the establishment of a compact of free association. This latter option would theoretically mirror the relationship the United States maintains with several Pacific Island nations, granting the U.S. total control over defense and security matters while allowing for a degree of internal self-governance. The administration's public rhetoric has become increasingly assertive, with officials emphasizing that the Arctic's strategic importance has grown exponentially due to melting ice caps and the subsequent opening of new trade routes and access to vast, untapped mineral reserves. Crucially, the White House has refused to take any options off the table, with Leavitt explicitly stating that the military remains an available tool for the commander-in-chief. This stance follows the recent and controversial U.S. military intervention in Venezuela, an action that many analysts believe has emboldened the Trump administration to pursue a more aggressive territorial agenda. The internal deliberations in the West Wing involve high-level figures, including Stephen Miller and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, though reports suggest a spectrum of opinions exists within the cabinet regarding the methodology of the acquisition. While some advisors favor a diplomatic and economic approach, others are pushing for a more coercive strategy, citing the need to act before geopolitical rivals can establish a permanent foothold. The president himself has voiced frustration with the slow pace of traditional diplomacy, indicating that he expects a resolution to the Greenland problem within the next 2 months. This timeline has put the international community on high alert, as the transition from hypothetical interest to active policy indicates a fundamental change in American foreign policy. The world is now watching to see how a second Trump term will redefine the concept of national borders and the traditional limits of international law in the modern era. The most provocative aspect of the current discourse in Washington is the explicit mention of the United States military as a potential instrument for securing Greenland. Following the capture of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, the administration appears to be operating under a doctrine of necessity, where the perceived security of the United States supersedes traditional norms of territorial integrity. Senior officials have argued that Greenland is currently a strategic vacuum that is being targeted by the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China. By citing the presence of Russian submarines and Chinese scientific research vessels in the Arctic, the White House justifies its interest as a defensive measure to prevent the encirclement of North America. When questioned about the legality or the optics of using force against a NATO ally like Denmark, administration figures like Stephen Miller have remained dismissive, suggesting that the sheer disparity in military power makes a conventional conflict unlikely, as no nation would realistically choose to engage the U.S. military over the island's future. This heavy-handed approach has sent shockwaves through the Pentagon and the Department of State, where career diplomats and military leaders are reportedly concerned about the long-term implications of such threats. The Patuxent Space Base, formerly known as Thule Air Base, already serves as a critical node in the U.S. ballistic missile early warning system, but the administration argues this footprint is insufficient for the challenges of 2026. They envision a total militarization of the island, transforming it into an unsinkable aircraft carrier that commands the North Atlantic. The rhetoric coming from the White House suggests that the administration views the Arctic as a theater where the old rules of the post-World War II order no longer apply. This shift toward a might makes right philosophy is being justified to the American public as a necessary evolution to protect the homeland from encroaching adversaries. The suggestion that military force is always an option is not merely a rhetorical flourish. It is a calculated signal intended to pressure the Danish government into a negotiated sale. By framing the issue in martial terms, the president is signaling that he views the acquisition of Greenland not just as a real estate deal, but as a mandatory expansion of the American defensive perimeter that will be achieved regardless of the diplomatic cost. The reaction from Europe has been one of unprecedented alarm and unified defiance against the American proposal. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has been unwavering in her response, reiterating her 2019 stance that Greenland is not for sale and adding that the very suggestion of a military option is absurd and deeply disturbing. This sentiment is echoed by Greenlandic Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen, who has stated that Greenlandic sovereignty resides with its people and is not a commodity to be traded between global superpowers. The diplomatic rift has quickly escalated beyond a bilateral dispute between the U.S. and Denmark, evolving into a fundamental crisis for the NATO alliance. In a rare show of total continental solidarity, the leaders of the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, and Spain released a joint statement condemning the American rhetoric. They warned that any attempt to alter the status of Greenland through coercion or force would represent a terminal breach of the North Atlantic Treaty. French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz have been particularly vocal, suggesting that Europe must now accelerate its efforts towards strategic autonomy to protect itself from an increasingly unpredictable ally. The European Union is also exploring economic and legal countermeasures to protect Denmark's interests, including potential sanctions or the invocation of international arbitration. For the Danes, Greenland is not just a territory, but a vital part of the Danish realm with a complex history of decolonization and home rule. The idea that Washington could simply buy the island ignores the democratic rights of the 57,000 inhabitants who live there. European analysts point out that the U.S. approach is backfiring by strengthening the resolve of the Greenlandic people to seek even greater independence, rather than closer ties with America. The tension has reached a point where Danish naval vessels are reportedly increasing their patrols in the waters around Greenland, a symbolic gesture to assert sovereignty in the face of American pressure. This standoff represents the most significant challenge to Western unity in decades, as the core principles of the liberal international order, self-determination and the sanctity of borders, are being tested by the very nation that helped create them. The European front remains firm, signaling that a Greenland deal will not be achieved through traditional or coercive diplomacy without destroying the Western security architecture. Beneath the military and diplomatic posturing lies a massive economic driver that makes Greenland an irresistible target for the Trump administration: the global race for critical minerals and rare earth elements. As the world transitions toward advanced technologies, green energy, and sophisticated weapon systems, the demand for materials like neodymium, praseodymium, and dysprosium has skyrocketed. Currently, China dominates the global supply chain for these minerals, a fact that the White House views as an unacceptable strategic vulnerability. Greenland is believed to hold some of the world's largest undeveloped deposits of these resources, alongside significant reserves of uranium, zinc, and iron ore. By acquiring Greenland, the United States would instantaneously secure a domestic supply of the materials required for the 21st century economy, effectively breaking the Chinese monopoly. This economic manifest destiny is a central theme in the briefings being provided to the president, who sees the island as a treasure chest that would pay for itself many times over. The administration's plan involves opening up the island to large-scale American mining interests, bypassing the strict environmental regulations currently enforced by the Danish and Greenlandic governments. This America First approach to resource extraction is being presented as a way to create jobs and ensure technological supremacy for decades to come. However, this vision is in direct conflict with the desires of the local population and environmental advocates who fear that unregulated mining would destroy Greenland's fragile Arctic ecosystem. The Greenlandic government has historically been cautious about mining, seeking to balance economic development with the preservation of their traditional way of life and the environment. The U.S. proposal, however, envisions a rapid industrialization of the island. Furthermore, the melting of the Greenland ice sheet is revealing new land and potential offshore oil and gas fields, further increasing the island's value in the eyes of Washington. The administration's focus on acquiring the island is essentially an attempt to privatize and nationalize these global commons for American benefit. This economic warfare, disguised as national security policy, is a primary reason why the administration is unwilling to accept no for an answer. The stakes are viewed in Washington as a zero-sum game. If the United States does not control Greenland's resources, then China or Russia eventually will, leaving America at a permanent disadvantage in the global industrial race. In the United States, the proposal to acquire Greenland has ignited a fierce political debate that reflects the deep divisions within the country. Supporters of the president argue that the move is a visionary act of statesmanship, comparing it to the Louisiana Purchase or the acquisition of Alaska. They believe that in an era of renewed great power competition, the United States must expand its geographic and resource base to remain the world's preeminent power. Conversely, congressional Democrats and some moderate Republicans have expressed horror at the rhetoric of military force. Senator Ruben Gallego and others have moved to introduce legislation that would explicitly block the use of federal funds for any military operations directed at Greenland or Denmark. Critics argue that the president is pursuing a Monroe Doctrine, a modern, aggressive expansion of the Monroe Doctrine, which seeks to treat the entire Western Hemisphere and the Arctic as a private American lake. This domestic opposition faces an uphill battle, as the administration's recent success in Venezuela has neutralized many traditional restraint arguments within the Republican Party. The political calculation in the White House is that the American public will support territorial expansion if it is framed as a matter of national survival and economic prosperity. As the 2026 midterm elections approach, the Greenland issue is likely to become a central campaign theme, with the administration painting opponents as weak on national security. The legal implications are also being debated by constitutional scholars, who question whether the president has the authority to unilaterally pursue the acquisition of foreign territory without a formal treaty ratified by the Senate. Despite these hurdles, the president has indicated he is moving forward with a 60-day deadline to see significant progress. This ultimatum sets the stage for a volatile period in international relations. If the administration continues on this path, the world may witness a fundamental reordering of global alliances. The United States is signaling that it is no longer content with being the leader of a rules-based order. It is now seeking to become a traditional territorial empire. Whether this strategy results in the peaceful acquisition of a strategic asset or the total collapse of the Atlantic Alliance remains the most critical question of 2026. The fate of Greenland has become a symbol for the future of global politics, where the ambitions of a superpower collide with the sovereign rights of a small nation and the collective security of an entire continent.